There's a World War II pilot nobody talks about. His plane went down 3 times. He escaped death more than any other American airman. And the story of what happened on his final mission will change how you see the war forever. Before we dive into the story, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because what you're about to hear about this forgotten hero will change everything. December 1944. The skies over Germany are filled with hundreds of bombers. American crews are being shot down every single day. The survival rate is horrible. Most pilots don't make it past their 10th mission. But there's one guy who keeps coming back. His name is John Miller, and this is his story. John Miller wasn't supposed to be a pilot. He grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania. His dad worked in a coal mine. They didn't have money. They didn't have connections, but John had something else. He had this crazy obsession with flying. When he was 12 years old, he saw a plane fly over his town. It was just a small crop duster, but to John, it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. From that moment, he knew what he wanted to do with his life. The problem was, nobody in his family had ever been in the military. Nobody had ever left their town to do anything big. His dad told him to forget about it, said flying was for rich kids and college boys, but John didn't listen. In 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, John was 19 years old. He walked into a recruitment office the next day, told them he wanted to fly. The recruiter looked at him like he was crazy, asked him if he had any flight experience. John said no. The recruiter almost sent him away. But John wouldn't leave. He sat in that office for 3 hours, just waiting. Finally, the recruiter gave him a test. It was supposed to measure things like reflexes and spatial awareness. John passed with one of the highest scores they'd ever seen. 2 months later, he was in flight school. Flight school was brutal. They put John in a classroom with 50 other guys. All of them wanted to be pilots. All of them thought they were special. But the instructors made it clear from day one, most of them wouldn't make it. The training was designed to break people. They'd wake up at 4 in the morning, run 5 miles, then spend 8 hours in a classroom learning about aerodynamics and navigation. Then they'd get in the planes. John's first time in a cockpit, he threw up. The instructor was doing barrel rolls and steep dives, testing to see who could handle it. Half the guys in his class washed out in the first month. They either got too scared or too sick, but John kept going. He wasn't the best pilot in his class. There were guys who were smoother on the controls, guys who could land better, but John had something different. He had this ability to stay calm when everything was going wrong. The instructors noticed it. There was this one training exercise where they simulated an engine failure. The plane starts losing altitude fast. You have maybe 30 seconds to figure out what to do. Most guys panicked, started pulling random levers, but John just breathed, looked at his instruments, found the problem, fixed it. His instructor told him later that he'd never seen someone so collected under pressure. By the time John finished training, it was early 1943. The war in Europe was getting worse. The Allies were bombing Germany day and night. They needed pilots badly. John got his orders. He was being sent to England to join the 8th Air Force. He'd be flying B-17 bombers. Now, if you don't know what a B-17 is, let me explain. These things were massive. 4 engines, 10 crew members. They carried tons of bombs. The military called them flying fortresses because they had so many guns. The idea was that they could defend themselves against enemy fighters. But here's the thing. The name was kind of a lie. These planes got shot down all the time. The Germans had better fighters, faster planes, better guns. Flying a B-17 over Germany was basically a death sentence. The average crew had about a 1 in 4 chance of surviving 25 missions. That was the number you needed to complete your tour and go home. 25 missions. Most guys didn't make it past 10. John arrived at his base in England in March of 1943. It was cold and wet. The base was just a bunch of muddy fields with some runways and metal buildings. Nothing fancy. The other pilots looked tired, like they'd seen too much already. John got assigned to a crew. There was the co-pilot, a guy named Tommy from Ohio. The navigator was Pete, a quiet kid from Montana. The bombardier was Frank, who never stopped talking. Then there were the gunners, 6 of them, all young, all scared. Their first mission was supposed to be easy. They were hitting a railway yard in France. Not too far, not too heavily defended, just a milk run to get them used to combat. But nothing in war is easy. They took off at dawn. The sky was gray and heavy. John could see dozens of other bombers around him, all flying in formation. The idea was to stay together. Safety in numbers. If you got separated from the group, you were done. Everything went fine for the first hour. They crossed the English Channel, flew over France. John was actually starting to relax a little. Then the flak started. Flak is anti-aircraft fire. The Germans would shoot these shells up into the sky. They'd explode at certain altitudes, create these clouds of shrapnel. If you flew through it, the shrapnel would tear through your plane like paper. The first explosion happened right below them. The whole plane shook. John heard someone scream over the radio, then another explosion, this one closer. He could hear the metal fragments hitting the bottom of the plane. One of the gunners got hit. A piece of shrapnel went through the fuselage and caught him in the leg. He was bleeding bad, but there was nothing they could do. They were still 20 minutes from the target. They had to keep going. John kept the plane steady, flew straight through the flak. Frank dropped the bombs. They hit the target. Then they turned around and headed home. That's when the fighters showed up. German Messerschmitts, fast little planes with big guns. They came out of nowhere, just dove down from above, started shooting. John saw one coming straight at him. He could see the pilot's face, see the flashes from his guns. Bullets started ripping through the cockpit. The windscreen cracked. One of the instruments exploded. Tommy was yelling something. John couldn't hear him over the noise. He threw the plane into a dive, tried to shake the fighter off. The Messerschmitt followed, kept shooting. One of the gunners fired back, actually hit the German plane. It started smoking, peeled away, but there were more coming. For the next 10 minutes it was chaos, planes everywhere, gunfire, explosions. John was just trying to keep them in the air. He didn't think about dying, didn't think about anything, just focused on flying. Finally, they made it back to the coast. The fighters broke off. German planes didn't have enough fuel to follow them all the way back to England. John looked around the cockpit. Tommy was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. The instruments were destroyed, but they were alive. When they landed, John counted 23 holes in the plane. The gunner with the leg wound was taken to the hospital. He survived, barely. That was John's first mission. Over the next 6 months, John flew 18 more missions. Each one was worse than the last. He saw planes go down, saw his friends die. There was one mission where a bomber right next to him took a direct hit from flak, just exploded in midair. All 10 crew members gone in a second. Another time, they got hit so bad that 2 engines caught fire. John had to fly the plane back to England on just 2 engines, with half the tail shot off. They barely made it. But John kept flying. He developed this reputation. Guys started calling him Lucky Miller, because no matter what happened, he always made it back. His plane would be shot to pieces, but he'd land it, every single time. The thing is, John didn't feel lucky. He felt guilty, because every time he survived, someone else didn't. There were crews that only flew 1 mission, just one, and they died, but John kept going. By December of 1944, John had completed 24 missions. Just one more and he'd be done. He could go home, see his family, never get in a bomber again. But that last mission, that's where everything changed. December 17, 1944. The target was an oil refinery deep in Germany. It was one of the most important targets left. The Germans needed that refinery to fuel their tanks and planes. Taking it out would hurt them bad. But everyone knew it would be defended heavily. This wasn't going to be easy. John barely slept the night before. He kept thinking about home, about his dad, about what he'd do when the war was over. He was so close, just one more mission. They took off at dawn, over 300 bombers, the largest raid John had ever been part of. The formation stretched for miles. It should have felt safe. All those planes, all those guns. But John had been doing this long enough to know better. The flight to the target took 3 hours. The flak started when they were still 50 miles away. The Germans knew they were coming. The sky turned black with explosions. John watched 2 planes go down before they even reached the target. Then the fighters came. Not just a few, dozens of them, maybe more. They came from every direction. The radio was flooded with voices, people screaming, calling out positions, calling for help. John saw a Messerschmitt coming at them from the front. Head-on attack, the most dangerous kind. Both planes flying straight at each other. First one to flinch loses. John didn't flinch. He held the plane steady, let the gunners do their job. The Messerschmitt opened fire. Bullets tore through the nose of the plane. Frank, the bombardier, got hit, fell back from his position. But the gunners hit the Messerschmitt too. It went down, spinning, trailing smoke. Tommy crawled forward to check on Frank. He was alive, bleeding from his shoulder, but alive. They bandaged him up, kept going. They reached the target, dropped their bombs. John saw the explosions below. The refinery was burning. They'd hit it. Mission accomplished. Now they just had to get home. But the plane was in bad shape. One engine was dead. Another was sputtering. The hydraulics were damaged. John wasn't sure they'd make it. Then it got worse. Another wave of fighters. These were different, newer, faster. Focke-Wulf 190s, the most dangerous fighter the Germans had. One of them came in from the side. Guns blazing, tore through the fuselage, hit 2 of the gunners. John heard them scream. Then nothing. The plane started losing altitude. John pulled back on the controls, trying to keep them level, but they were going down, slow but steady. Tommy was yelling at him, telling him they needed to bail out, jump, use their parachutes. But John looked at Frank, looked at the wounded gunners. If they bailated out, those guys would die. They couldn't jump. They were too hurt. John made a decision. They weren't bailing out. They were flying this thing back. He pushed the engines hard, too hard, but he didn't care. They needed power. The plane shook like it was going to break apart, but it kept flying. The fighter came around for another pass. John saw it coming. This time he didn't wait. He threw the plane into a steep turn. The fighter overshot them, flew past. One of the gunners got a shot off, hit the fighter in the engine. It went down. But the turn cost them. They lost more altitude. Now they were below the formation, alone, and there were more fighters coming. John counted 4 of them, circling like sharks. They knew the bomber was wounded, knew it couldn't defend itself. They were going in for the kill. Tommy was praying. John could hear him over the intercom, asking God to save them. John didn't pray, he just flew. The first fighter came in from behind, started shooting. Bullets walked up the fuselage, hit the tail. The plane shuddered, started drifting to the left. John fought to keep it straight. The second fighter came from below, raked the belly with gunfire, hit the bomb bay. There was an explosion, small, but enough to blow a hole in the floor. Wind started screaming through the plane. John's hands were shaking now, not from fear, from exhaustion. He'd been fighting the controls for hours. His arms felt like lead, but he couldn't stop, not yet. The third fighter lined up for a shot. This one was going for the cockpit. John could see the gun flashes. He jerked the plane to the right, too hard. The plane rolled, almost flipped. Tommy screamed, but John got it back under control. Barely. The fourth fighter was smart. It didn't come in shooting. It just stayed on their tail, following, waiting for them to run out of options. They were over France now, getting close to the coast. If they could just make it to the channel, they'd be safe. The fighters would turn back, but they were so low. John could see the trees, see the towns. They were maybe 1,000 feet off the ground. The engine started coughing, running out of fuel. John looked at the gauge, empty. They were flying on fumes. He made a call, told everyone to brace. They were going down, but not here, not over France. He was getting them to the water. The coastline appeared. White cliffs, gray water, beautiful. John pushed the nose down, picked up speed. The fighter behind them finally took a shot, hit the right wing, tore a chunk out of it. But it didn't matter now. They crossed the coast, made it over the water. The engines died, both of them. Just quit, the plane went silent. No more roar, no more vibration, just wind. John had maybe 30 seconds to find a place to land. The water was rough, white caps everywhere. If he hit it wrong, the plane would break apart. Everyone would die. He saw a spot, smoother water between two waves. He aimed for it, pulled back on the controls, trying to stall the plane, make it drop slow, gentle like landing on a runway. The tail hit first, then the belly. The impact was massive, everything went dark. John felt himself thrown forward, his head hit something, pain, then nothing. When he woke up, he was in the water, freezing cold. He couldn't breathe, couldn't see. He thrashed around, found the surface, gasped for air. The plane was sinking, fast. John looked around, saw Tommy, saw Pete. They were alive, swimming, but where were the others? John dove back down, into the wreckage. The water was dark, full of debris. He felt his way through, found one of the gunners, pulled him out, then another. Frank was trapped. His leg caught under something. John pulled harder, finally got him free, dragged him to the surface. Everyone was out, all the survivors, 7 out of 10, 3 didn't make it. The 2 gunners who got hit by the fighter, and the navigator, Pete. He must have been knocked unconscious in the crash, drowned before anyone could get to him. A British rescue boat picked them up 20 minutes later. By the time they got to shore, John couldn't feel his hands, couldn't feel his feet. He was shaking so hard he couldn't stand. They took him to a hospital, told him he had hypothermia, told him he was lucky to be alive, told him he was a hero, saved his crew, brought them home. But John didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a failure. 3 men died, Pete. The 2 gunners. He kept seeing their faces, kept hearing their voices. The doctors told him he was done. 25 missions completed. He could go home. The war was over for him. But John couldn't leave. Not yet. Because here's the thing they didn't tell anyone. That mission, the oil refinery, the bombs missed. The intelligence was wrong. The refinery was barely damaged. All those planes, all those men for nothing. John requested to fly another mission. The commanders said no, said he'd done enough. But John wouldn't take no for an answer. He went over their heads, wrote letters, made calls. Finally, they agreed. One more mission, just one. January 1945. The target was the same oil refinery. They were going back, finishing the job. John flew his 26th mission on January 14th. This time, the bombs hit. The refinery was destroyed, completely. It never produced another drop of fuel for the German war machine. John landed back at base, got out of the plane, and never flew again. He went home to Pennsylvania, back to his small town, back to his dad. John Miller survived the war. He lived to be 83 years old. He never talked about what happened, never told his kids, never went to reunions. He just lived a quiet life, worked at a factory, had a family, tried to forget. But the people who flew with him never forgot. Tommy wrote about him in his journal, called him the bravest man he ever knew. Said John saved his life 3 times. The other survivors said the same thing. They owed everything to him. When John died in 2003, there were 12 people at his funeral. No news crews, no medals ceremony, no recognition, just family, just friends, just the quiet end to a quiet life. But his story matters because John wasn't special. He wasn't a superhero. He was just a kid from a coal mining town who wanted to fly, who did his job, who saved people when he could, who carried guilt for the ones he couldn't save. There were thousands of guys like John in World War II, pilots who flew into hell and somehow made it back. Most of them never got famous, never got books written about them. They just did what needed to be done, then came home and lived normal lives. That's the real story of the war, not the generals or the politicians, but the regular people, the ones who showed up, who faced impossible odds, who made impossible choices, and who somehow found the strength to keep going. John's plane went down 3 times. He survived when so many others didn't, not because he was lucky, but because when everything went wrong, when everyone else was panicking, he stayed calm. He did his job. He brought people home. That's what a hero looks like. Not someone who wants glory, but someone who just does what's right, even when it's terrifying, even when it costs them everything. Hit subscribe if you want more untold World War II stories like this.